Welcome to Design Thinking Games, a fantasy and user experience podcast. Each episode, your podcast hosts, Tim Broadwater and Michael Schofield, will examine the player experience of board games, pen and paper role-playing games, live-action games, mobile games, and video games. You can find every episode, including this one, on your podcatcher of choice and on the web at designthinkinggames.com.
This episode is brought to you by listeners like you at patreon.com/designthinkinggames. It is Halloween 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Our podcast, Design Thinking Games, does skew very... we are definitely gamers and user experiencers who like horror. We like mystery. We like phantasmagoria. That's definitely apparent from our season 1. And one of the things we talked about doing is for Halloween playing and checking out the new game House of Ashes, the Dark Pictures Anthology's 3rd out of 4 games for season 1. And so I guess the first question is how many people of your 5 main characters survive?
I got through with 3. I had 3 survivors. We should preface this just for folks who don't know is that, okay, so there is a series made by a variety of people, but namely Supermassive Games. Supermassive is the studio, called the Dark Pictures Anthologies. They now have 3 of them, and they have promised 4 for what they're calling their first season. These are Supermassive got famous or got lauded for their Until Dawn game, which was a PlayStation exclusive. And
did they make Until Dawn? Because I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah,
I love Until Dawn. That's why I love this, kind of genre of like watching a horror movie.
That's what it is, right? It's a choose your own adventure with QuickTime actions, right? And so, Telltale got pretty popular about this for a little bit, but Supermassive Games is games. Did it right? Whereas Telltale is pretty buggy in certain cases. For the most part, these are really well put together narratives that have really interesting branches. So they have 3 games out. They just released House of Ashes.
Yeah, and I think the trailer has been out for it for a year because what they've been doing, and what I kind of like, is that when you beat one game, the reward for beating the game is it unlocks the trailer for the next kind of book. And so you don't really know until you beat the game. I mean, you could kind of check online after the game comes out, but it's kind of that nice piece where where's it going next? And so a year ago when if you beat Little Hope, which is the small kind of Salem's Lot kind of witch village kind of one, when you beat that, you got a trailer at the end for House of Ashes, which is, I believe, set in Desert Storm, right? And
no, it's 2003. This is post 9/11. This is the invasion of Iraq. So House of Ashes is set. You play a number of participants, mostly Marines. There's a CIA operator, and you also get to play one of the Iraqi Republican Guard that's taking place after the fateful announcement where George Bush announced mission accomplished. There's even a newspaper lying around where you can see that as the front page. So Saddam has fallen, and it's almost the immediate aftermath of that when go figure, they're still looking for chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And the entire premise is that, hey, satellite imagery has shown that there is an underground facility out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of next to what they call, I think, the Zagros Mountains. And you are part of, or the people you play are going to investigate it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it's so fresh that the war being fresh, or Saddam, all of that's so fresh that even members of the Iraqi military, right? They're not.
Yeah, no surrender has been declared. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the environment like you're going into. And if you're familiar with the other games, it just kind of, it's layers of an onion, right? So you just kind of constantly are peeling back, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you've played Man of Medan or Little Hope, it starts out as like this one thing that you think you know what's going on, and then it kind of goes into like, oh, it expands. Like what you think is happening in the beginning, where you're just exploring like what you say, Marines, and that you're exploring a potential weapon site of turns into like, oh, this is not a weapon site. And then when you think that's going on, that you've encountered, let's say, an ancient temple or something of that nature that's been buried, then it turns out that that's not what's going on. And then when you kind of go down that rabbit hole, it again is like, no, you have no idea what's going on. And I think what I did horrible. You've played all 3 games, and I think I've played all 3 as well. I did so horrible in the first one that, this is now 3 years old, that you were in Man of Medan, and I ended the first time I played it so prematurely that you can end the game prematurely and lose a lot of your characters and not really uncover what the full story is. And that's common. That's a very common experience. And so you may not get to the full truth. And then the other thing is the curator, right?
Yeah, so the curator is this kind of like Call of Cthulhu like keeper character who there's not really any kind of like narrative sandwich here where for whatever reason you are helping the curator flesh out these tales.
And he's kind of judging you, but then also prying you, and then
weird.
Also at some points giving you hints.
There's something sort of like supernatural about it, right? Because you are not really the characters in the stories you're telling. You are choosing their fates. You are that meta. You are that player, and the curator is some sort of, I don't know. I think
he definitely treats you like a reader or like a gamer.
Yeah.
Like there's that acknowledgement of the fourth wall. That it's like, oh, he will say comments like if someone dies accidentally or you make a wrong choice, he will call out your choice and why you let that person kill them. So the tense is not of the character. It's actually you're outside of it, and he acknowledges that omniscient kind of fourth wall.
I think that's a great way to put it. This kind of like fourth wall framing provides like a really interesting dynamic, because you're right, the curator judges you. It's like you made a bad choice and one of the characters dies, and he kind of tisks you. Could it have gone another way? He begs that question, and you could have made a different choice.
So there's another mechanic that's similar to this. I don't know if you've played some of the Silent Hill games, right?
Yeah.
So there's one Silent Hill, Shattered Memories. I don't know if you've played that one.
I never played that one.
But the whole thing keeps... Yeah, so every so often you cut back to like you are obviously sitting in... it could even be like an LA Noire thing. Like you're with a police or a homicide detective, and you're recounting what happens. And then it keeps cutting back to that. But in Shattered Memories, you're with a therapist, and you're kind of telling them what you experienced in Silent Hill. And they're like, well, why did you do that? Or why did you go there? Or and so there was this, so having this kind of outside character that frames this horrible experience that you're going through, and this phantasmagoria, like mystery kind of intense, horrific experience. It's nothing new, but what I will say about the curator is I think that they are pretty hard on the nose hitting that he is deaf.
Maybe. I don't know. I didn't get any of that.
Every time the lightning flashes, he's got the skull overlay, or you see the skull behind the face,
no,
right?
Really?
Every time the lightning flashes,
wow, I never noticed
see the skull behind him. And then the intro music for all 3 games is the old mountain music, I Am Death. but they've turned it into a rock kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then when the credits roll at the end, it's I Am Death, but it's like a punk thing, or it changes flavor. But the song is still I Am Death. And so, and he always takes this kind of posturing to where, you know, he's kind of intrigued and judging at what you're doing, but then also maybe will help you, but that he is outside the story. He cannot interfere. And he is just the curator or the chronicler.
Wow.
You never got that impression?
No, in 3 games now, that never dawned on me. I thought...
You never saw the skull
No.
at all?
So, like, I thought of him more as like a Sandman comic book-like character where, you know, where I guess Death is literally a character in the Sandman as well. But I think of him as sort of like the librarian or the keeper. Like a proper chronicler. I like that there's some sort of like thing where he expresses that you, the player, are the choice maker. He is not, there are rules that he must adhere to, and he is not allowed to interfere, but occasionally he will bend those rules to offer a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance. But in general,
like he's a deity or something. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, I mean, like, you know, and if he's not the rule maker, he is bound by some other rules. What I think it really does is kind of interesting because there's a layer, like there are different layers of agency, whereas, you know, these characters are so well defined that they have their own choices, they have their own personality makeup, they have a sense of their own direction, their own agency. But the reality is, as a player, you are making these choices for them, or you are making the choices for some other unspoken, unnamed character who is also making choices for them, and you are part of some like larger framework with a curator of which there are rules. And, you know, the choices that you actually get are quite limited. They're only like go left, go right, do this, don't do that. And there's this whole I don't know, you could probably like deconstruct this entire Dark Anthology series as some sort of like a message about how little control you actually have in any given situation. Someone's already making the choice for you, or the path is largely laying out before you.
Yeah, I guess I've always interpreted it that way because, you know, anytime that you visit him or cut to him or begin with him or end with him in his library where he has all of the books about what's happened and is interacting with you, it is always storming outside. And every time it cracks the lightning, you see the skull behind his face. Every single time in all 3 games, right? And then the logo for the Dark Picture anthologies is a skull that has, you know, it changes the overlaid image each time for, you know, Man of Medan or Little Hope or House of Ashes, and then also for the one they show at the end, which is the Devil Inside, I believe. And so I
mean, now that you say it out loud, this totally makes sense, right? Like,
well, no, I also think I know what you're talking about with Sandman. So he does seem like, okay, he's the deity as well as a curator, and you get appearances behind that he is death, you know, and that's how I've taken it. And you can find pictures online where it actually has the skull flash lightning kind of overlay, and it's happened in all the games. So
yeah, I'm gonna go back and like I'm sure there's like a YouTube cut of like all the who is the curator kind of conspiracy theory, because now it's super interesting. But I love the framing, and I love the idea that it's ultimately like, you know, these characters are hopeless because no choice they make is their own.
Yeah, and all of the tales, it doesn't matter, you know, there's only 3 out now, but they're all tragic. All of them have death. Like in the second game, there's so much death in the beginning that, I mean, it just sets the pace of like, there's no way that you can save the people in the beginning, you know? And it's the same thing here. Like your whole team who goes in and everyone you know, maybe there's 10 or 12 people, but 5 are really all you potentially can save. And to your point, like you saved 3, I only saved 2. And mine came down to where, like, I thought it was doing really well. They were surviving longer, but then it was one of those gosh darn freaky horror. What did you call it? It's like a skills,
a quick time action, like a jump scare.
Yeah, like a quick time action jump scare, or like a skill check kind of thing where you're running and you have to hit something at a certain time, and you're literally like, oh no, I was scratching my face, or I was reaching for like my drink, or like I was eating a chip, and they're dead now. And so it's like, oh, so it does keep you so at the edge of your seat. And we've talked about this before about in the horror mechanics method, like you cannot run in the game. No. You have to walk through everything. So it forces you to experience it. It forces you to pay attention. And all it takes is 1 second and everything could change.
The biggest thing I clocked here was that like this felt like Resident Evil controls, because you're over the shoulder or a little bit behind. You're piloting the character. You're slow. It's dark. You
tight enclosed spaces.
And so sometimes the camera is actually really quite difficult to control. And we've talked in the past about like, well, in another circumstance, these could be pretty annoying controls, but in this case, they force you to pay very careful attention. Pan the camera very deliberately, right? Check your corners, right? Because oftentimes you're walking around in a cave with a flashlight, so you're going bit by bit, and it just forces you to take it at a certain pace so that ultimately the game can control the narrative and scare you or hit you with a quick time action that you weren't prepared for.
I think that totally contributes to the creep factor on it, but then you can't shoot. You're not like you can just unload in Resident Evil. You can never really unload until it lets you.
Only if it gives you an option, yeah. If you had to give this like a rate, you recommend people like how did you like this compared to the other three? I would say that
I like the game series because and I didn't know, or at least maybe I forgot that the same studio made Before Dawn. Now, Before Dawn, or Until Dawn, right? Now, Until Dawn takes about 8 to 9 hours to play through it. And so it is doable in a day. But what I like, a movie is too short, right? A movie is like your hour and a half or 2 hour kind of movie. But I feel like they have this just right. Like they have this to where you are watching a mystery, drama, horror, whatever, action horror, whatever. But that's the genre, right? And they keep it to like roughly 5 to 6 hours. The game will be over no matter what, at the max of 5 to 6 hours. Yep. Like it could be definitely premature. You can kill all the characters and be done much sooner. But like whatever the ending is, whatever you've chosen, whoever you've protected, or like whatever choices you've made, or whatever paths or secrets you've uncovered, it's set to that time. So it's kind of like you are watching this scary horror drama movie, and you are making choices and doing skill checks through it. And so it is passive, but you are on the edge of your seat. And I say, like, in general, if you like scary movies, or you like survival horror, or you just like mystery books, I think this game series is for you. And what I also like about it, and we've talked about this before, on social media, is what's very popular in telenovela and soap operas, and we're also seeing like in America Horror Story, is that you have characters coming back, real actors coming back every season, right? Who play just different characters, doing different things with different names. And I strongly believe, now I can't say this for certain, but I strongly believe that is what the Dark Picture Anthologies is doing with their character models.
Until you mentioned it in a tweet to me, like I think you're right. I think the Marine lieutenant you play, whose name is Jason, his face looks like the main boy character, like whose name I forget, in Little Hope, who is ultimately responsible for the events of that series, and who grows up to be that bus driver at the end. Their faces look identical, and I think Rachel is
and that's also Joe from Man of Medan. Joe from Man of Medan is the exact same person you're describing.
Yes.
And so
I love it.
There are these so I think that it's kind of a nod. Either they're trying to get away with it, but I don't think that's the case because I think gamers are smart and they know that. So I honestly think that they are kind of aligning themselves with this telenovela, soap opera, American Horror Story kind of thing to where we have, hey, we can use the same actors, but it's the models, right? But we can change the voices and change their personalities because a lot of people, I think, are making these connections between, the main character in House of Ashes and Joe from Man of Medan, or the girlfriend or the scientist, the girlfriend from, Little Hope or the scientist from House of Ashes. I mean, they're the same kind of thing. So I find that's cool. That's interesting. And that what keeps people in the series. And when you beat each one, like we said, it shows you the trailer for the next one. So that's kind of the cliffhanger. Within a year, it's going to come out. I don't know when the next one's going to come out, which is The Devil Inside. But I feel like that's the appeal. Like, it's like, I'll come back to, it's like Jessica Lange, like for American Horror Story. Like, people will keep coming back if they keep using Jessica Lange or Lady Gaga or, Angela Bassett or whoever.
It's a really interesting mechanic, right? That I can't think of. I guess they did do that with telenovelas. I think of it as an American Horror Story trope, and it's really neat to see that applied to a game. I can't think of anyone who's done that, and I also would hazard to guess, although I'm happy to be wrong, that it has no bearing on the narrative. I have this like high level theory that's only that I only 10% buy myself, but I think there's a potential here where like, oh my gosh, like all of these characters are all the same, like reincarnations, like something like that.
Well, if the curator's the same and you're the same, and then when you're in the curator's library and he has 4 books there that all have these golden symbols on them, and one is of a boat and one is of a little doll and one is of a and it keeps you wondering, like, how are these 4 related and why are they encapsulated in a series? And then, and then this is not, and I don't think this is a stretch by any way, because if you look at the characters of House of Ashes, who was Rachel? Not her husband, but the one that she was in a relationship with?
Nick, Sergeant Nick.
Nick literally is the same face of Alex from, the first game, Man of Medan. Like, literally, it's the same face.
And Alex being the kind of like nerdy character who went along with his brother on the boat, right?
Yeah, but in this one, he's a Marine who's been through some trauma and then is exactly. And so, dude, it has to be there. They have to be building up to something. And the fanboy in me is like geeking out because it's like, what is, and then when they also, the big drama bomb that they also dropped at the end was not just, the trailer for the next game, but then also series like season 1. It's like, what?
Right.
So that actually season 1 does put parentheses around the first 4, right?
Exactly.
And then promises that there will be something different coming after season 1.
How strange, right? Especially because these are about like a year apart, right? They've taken a while to come out, and I've never considered them as part of a singular whole. I guess when you think about it, it makes sense because this is an anthology series, but I never thought of them as part of like a singular tale until they're like, bam, the next episode being, or the next game is like The Devil Within, I think. Does that sound right?
Or The Devil Inside.
The Devil
or something,
Inside or something like that.
Yeah.
And like, the season 1 finale. And I'm like, whoa. Okay, so now you have to kind of like think back on the 3 games that you have just finished as some part of whole. One thing I wanted to point out that really struck me is that House of Ashes, to me, was the least scary of the 2. And but there's a framing that is true about Man of Medan.
Let me ask, of the 3, which one was the scariest for you?
I think maybe Little Hope was the scariest.
Was for me.
Yeah,
I agree with you. It was creepy. Those ghosts were super
for
creepy.
real, man. Well, and even in Man of Medan, like the ghosts are creepy as well, right?
You can only, if you prematurely end the game, you're left with like, oh, this is what I think's going on, and this is what I meant by the onion peeling back like the layers.
Yeah.
But if you make it through the game, you will see what's going on, and you can never really replay it. I mean, the story will not have the same impact, right? Like the onion story, like as a metaphor, is like the first one. You're like, oh, we're gonna go explore this abandoned ship, we can get it for treasure, and then you're like, oh, it's haunted, and then you find out something else is going on behind it, explains it. But at some point you may not even make it to the haunted ship. You could die before you even get there, right? And then you could also die and you're like, oh my God, I got killed by ghosts because the ship is haunted. And then you don't realize, oh, what's really, the story behind it. That happened to me, right? Now, the second game, same thing. You're like, I'm going to this witchy, cursed town. It's like Salem Lot. And then you kind of find out after a while, it's like, oh, wait, I'm kind of getting the feeling that why are these ghosts specifically like the vices of these people, right? And then you kind of figure out like, oh, this is not happening at all. What's happening is actually this. Same thing for, kind of House of Ashes.
Wait, like, have you gone and looked at the other endings? Because I haven't, but I didn't get the sense that there was one of those things where, like, in House of Ashes, I get the sense that like what you think is happening is really happening.
No, it's just like how far you get.
Gotcha.
Because what I'm saying about the onion metaphor, and it's horrible, and I keep saying onion, but what it is, if they constructed the story in such a way that it functions layer by layer to a core. So if you don't make it, like in House of Ashes, I mean, I would say Man of Medan has been out for 2019, since 2019. So no really spoilers there. But the thing is like you can die before you even get to the ship. Yeah. So it's just like, oh, it's a bunch of kids partying and they have like a diving accident and it's over.
Wait, there's an ending where is that early?
Yeah, well, no, it's not like an ending. You think of endings, this is the thing.
This is where you all die, yeah.
This is like what I was saying about the UX here.
Amazing.
Is of a pick-a-path story, like a choose-your-own-adventure book. And if the listeners at home probably know what those are, but they had Pick-a-Path as a name brand or Choose-Your-Own-Adventures as a name brand. But essentially it's this book that, for those who don't know it, you start reading at page 1, and then it says like, hey, make this choice. And if you make this choice, go to page 42. If you made this one, go to page 387. And then you kind of keep jumping. So you're just kind of, you start out all the same. You start out at the base of the tree, right? When we say this kind of tree, kind of pick-a-path kind of narrative system. So they've constructed, so it's better probably as a tree than an onion, because I think of it more as like layers, right? Mm-hmm. But at any point in that story of Man of Medan, if all of your characters die, or you come to a halting stop for whatever reason, and maybe some characters survive, you didn't go to the full out extent branches of the tree, and you don't really know what all's possible. That's given with pick-a-path stories because you can't figure out like, oh, I didn't even interact with the dragon, or I didn't even see the knight, or I didn't go into the maze, But with these, it is you have to make it through, and part of the mechanics of these dark anthology games is they have these little pictures that are spread out through the game, or tablets or artifacts or objects or whatever, but they actually show you a potential future. You have a premonition, and then when you do that, it creates like a branch, and then that lets you mitigate and stop. Now, if you didn't find that picture, that branch end would be your end, or you wouldn't know it was coming, and that could have been your end. But you kind of have to, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I feel like those games are structured in such a way to where you are trying to find all those pictures to try to mitigate all of the potential premature endings or short endings, so you can make it through the longest tree out to the tiniest branch, and that is what you find out like at the very end. That's the only way that you will find your survival and mitigating those and navigating these branches or tree system is the only way you'll find out what's really, really, really going on. Because if you do not, you think you're just a bunch of kids who died, like partying on a boat, or you encountered a ship and were killed by pirates, or you've encountered ships, you got away from the pirates, but you did not, the ship was haunted, or, and so on and so on.
It really is a masterclass of game design. You can tell that they play tested the shit out of this. The timing, the feel, the unraveling stories, the way that House of Ash is literally is about descending through layers, and the story gets weirder and weirder. And first it's got very big Exorcist vibes with like Pazuzu, the demon, right? Which isn't a spoiler because I think that's literally like the like one of the symbols on the in the like the trailers or whatever. And it continues to go back, and you're just digging through history, and history, the weirdness like unravels in such like a impressive way.
I feel like there are these weird kind of nods and connections that are actually in like American Horror Story, right? That are like, oh wait, Freak Show's connected to Asylum, and we now know that because we saw Freak Show, which happened 2 seasons after Asylum, and the character from Freak Show was in Asylum, right? And then we found out later that, Hotel is connected to Coven because they actually go to it in Coven.
Well, and even that like post-apocalyptic one is connected to Coven as well.
Yeah, and so it's these little pieces that are put together. But the thing about these games are, like, if you didn't see that stuff, pay attention, or choose the right paths, you probably didn't get the connections
What a
right?
design choice, man. That just makes the replayability. Again, it's narrative layering that is impressive. Like, it's just impressive.
Very impressive.
We put a lot of work into design thinking games, so if you like what we do and want to help us cover some costs, then consider supporting us at patreon.com/designthinkinggames. We also are Design Thinking Games on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter.
Thank you for listening to the Design Thinking Games podcast. To connect with your hosts, Michael or Tim, please go to designthinkinggames.com, where you can request topics, ask questions, or see what else is going on. Until next time, game on.